last-minute shake-up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM One help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Master Instructor Roundtable. Marty Miller here with co-host, dear friend, Miss Wendy Batts. Wendy, how are you doing?
I am great, Marty. How are you?
I'm doing good as always. I always look forward to our time together. Putting together the content is fun, working with you, but then also getting the message out to our NASM family members is always one of the best parts of my week.
Yes, mine too. And I think, Marty, you came up with this because we had an email from someone that was asking us to talk a little bit about power and how it relates to weight loss. So we always appreciate any topics that come in. We want to make sure that if there's a question that you have, let us know. If Marty and I can bring it to the forefront, we will. We are live today. So if you have any questions as we go through the content, as always, put it in the comments. And before the end of the show, Marty and I will go over and be sure to try to answer those questions.
Yeah, Wendy, I think this one was important for me for a reason. We're going to see the model here on the right. For those of you who are, with us on YouTube, but for those listening, we know the 5 phases, stabilization endurance to strength endurance to muscular development to max strength and empower. And Wendy, we've been teaching this for 20 years now. We are in our 20th year. We started, I remember getting our Starbucks back in 2005.
Yes.
In Calabasas. But over these 20 years, I think people have either gotten afraid of power training, misunderstood power training, think sometimes power training is not for everybody except for elite athletes or at least a high-level recreational athlete. But today, we're not only going to talk about the fundamental rules of power training, but also how that can be used for weight loss, which generally speaking, a lot of people don't think of phase 5 as a power training phase. So we're going to review that. We're going to discuss the different phases as the conversation goes and, maybe get into some programming ideas utilizing the power phase. But as we get into this, I want to say this right from the beginning because we might touch on it, come and go. If you know the model very well, I think you'll understand this. If you're new to NASM, we always are going to anchor to an assessment and working through the model from stabilization endurance into strength endurance, maybe muscular development, max strength, and then power. So when we talk about power for weight loss, we're assuming that this client or these type of clients are ready for power training. It's not someone that comes in day one at the beginning of the year and says, I want to lose 15 pounds, and we take them automatically to power training if they haven't earned the right to get there.
Well, I think that's super important. And I think it's also important to, when we, go to the next slide and we actually look at the phases, when you're reading the content, I know we haven't really been out doing a lot of workshops. Trust me, Marty and I push that because we want to get back on the road and work with you guys one-on-one and face-to-face. However, when you're looking at this, remember, it is a systematic and progressed model. So like Marty said, once you're actually looking at the assessment, each and every time, so every 4 to 6 weeks, you should reassess your client. So if they're in phase 1, they have mainly because they have a lot of compensations. Even if they didn't have a lot, but they have some, we're still going to start them in phase 1. And then as we reassess and we move them up the model, muscular development, muscular or maximum strength, so phases 3 and 4 are optional phases. And it's mainly, as Marty and I will talk through this, muscular development, I think is still important. If you're a senior, it's very important because we've talked about the importance of bone density and really trying to combat the loss of muscle mass. And so we're not asking them to be a bodybuilder, because in order to be a bodybuilder, nutrition plays a huge role in that, as well as lifting heavy. And the same thing with maximal strength. We're not trying to do 1 to 5 repetitions necessarily with our clients. hence why it's optional. However, 1, 2, and 5, we don't say are optional. Everyone should train for power. And so if a client comes in and they have weight loss as their goal, you want to dive deeper, but just remember, trying to get them to phase 5 is the ultimate goal. And then after you've gotten them through the model, hopefully you have been doing some sort of undulating, which just means going from one phase to another when they're ready, of course. So like if they're only in phase 1 and 2, you're undulating 1 and 2. If they've gotten 1, 2, and 5, you're undulating all 3. I think it's really, really important. But when you're looking at the model in general, you can get any client at any age utilizing this model, and it's going to be safe, effective, and efficient. And it's going to give you a blueprint. And that's why Marty and I love this. For 20 years, I've said that word. It's your blueprint. That's your, not word, but your phase or phrase, your blueprint. It gives you an idea of how to properly design a program based on what you're seeing in their assessment. So it's very, very individualized. But no matter what, we're still focusing on, as it says, the physical abilities. We're still focusing on flexibility. We're, of course, working on strength, aerobic endurance, core stabilization, balance, coordination, power. All of it is all inclusive within each and every phase. It's just going to vary on how we're designing that program and what exercises and what tempo, which we'll talk about next, that you're using.
Yeah. And I've always said it's a toolbox. So we both have our ways to look at it as a, kind of a skeleton for decision making, right? And it guides you in that path. And, I said at the very beginning, some people have to go through the entire model before you get into phase 5. But, if you go back to NASM's YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts and put in Master Instructor Roundtable, we have other podcasts on power training and other components on how you can use battle ropes and you can do shadow boxing, you can use bands, even if you want or need to implement a few of these components earlier because the client is kind of needing that, right? That's where, the art and the science of training coming together. So we won't get through all of that here today, but there are other podcasts that I highly recommend you go back and search. So that way you can kind of put these together and understand, well, wait a minute, I have a newer client and I can still do some power safely. Maybe not be jumping, but it might be just simply battle ropes to get their heart rate up.
100%. And, anytime we start talking about acute variables, my favorite is I was in a workshop, Marty, and I think it might've been a workshop I might've taught with you or actually maybe Tony, but I had someone, we kept talking about acute variables and someone raised their hand and they're like, I don't even know what that means. And it's just the fancy combo word of meaning your sets, your reps, your intensity, your tempo. It's what someone should follow. And we've designed that based on research and based on how many reps in order to achieve a specific goal that someone should do. But we add a particular tempo to it. So therefore, we're emphasizing different parts of the movement pattern, if you will. So we're working in phase 1 a lot on deceleration. So the eccentric contraction. So when we talk about acute variables, it's anything that you can change within the program. And it's also known as your training variable, if you will. So it's going to determine the amount of stress that's placed on the body and ultimately the physical adaptation, which again, adaptation just means goal that is going to occur, such as increase in strength, endurance, weight loss, which is what this is about, and or muscle gain. So this can be viewed as the building blocks that are used to design an exercise program, which include the reps, sets, tempo, intensity, rest intervals, volume, training frequency, duration, of course, your exercise selection, and then the order in which these exercises should and or could be done based on your client and where they are within their program.
Yeah, very well said. I was just in the kitchen a second ago before coming in here and my fiance's in there cooking. I have no idea what she's doing. It seems organized. The only thing I would have had to do is grab the recipe, right? I would have had to follow a set of instructions to try my best to get the same results. So that's where when we give you these tempos, we give you the guidelines. If you're newer to this, you don't have to overthink it and try to make guesses. The instructions are there for you. If you follow them, backed by research, you're going to get amazing outcomes. And if you're not paying attention to the acute variables, you're not going to get what you're trying to create. It's that plain and simple.
Yes, it is. So when we look at more about the acute variables, it's the most fundamental component of the integrated training program because it's going to determine the amount of stress that you're placing on the body during each exercise session. So when you manipulate your acute variables, that's going to help you elicit specific performance for your clients while reducing injury. And those of you guys that are watching the PowerPoint, you can see that we've got a ton of different citations and references there with just that one sentence alone. I mean, anytime that you're saying, I want you to do 12 to 20 repetitions, that's a lot of repetitions. However, we're having you do it at a 4-2-1-0 or 4-2-1-1 tempo. And the reason it's written that way, it's not trying to make it confusing, but we're always going to have it as eccentric, isometric, concentric, and then isometric. So that's the 4 numbers and what those mean. So therefore, if I give my program to Marty looks at it, he's going to know exactly how fast I want that client to perform a single leg squat to row, a bicep curl, a tricep extension, whatever it is that I'm focusing on. But you're going to notice that first one, especially in phases 1 and 2, are going to be higher because most injuries occur when you're decelerating in the transverse plane. So if you can get your body to move ideally and optimally in every single exercise that you do in phases 1 and 2, that's going to set you up for such success when you hit power, because now you're taking that movement pattern, ensuring that the right muscles are working and the right prime movers are firing. And then you're going to be able to execute at a very high rate of force production, and you're going to have awesome outcomes. It's what ends up screwing people up is they just do it for the sake of doing it. There's no rhyme or reason for the exercise selection, or there's no tempo that follows it. So acute variables to me are the key to success when you're utilizing the model in order to get to phase 5 and be as efficient and successful as possible when you hit that phase.
Yeah, Wendy, and I think, I remember this from the functional training craze back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the still VHS tapes or DVDs came out with just countless different exercises, stability balls, etc. Now I call it the Instagram craze and phase. There's some great stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but you could take some of the most basic exercises and change the acute variables, and you'll never run out of exercise ideas, right? So, it's great to make change, but you got to make change for the right purpose. And when you take a simple squat and go from body weight, from a stabilization into strength, endurance, into power, that same movement pattern of triple flexion, triple extension, you're going to light them up in theory. I say that in a good way because we're not searching for soreness, but you're going to light them up because you're taxing the body differently by manipulating and controlling specifically the acute variables. So get creative with your time under tension, your rest intervals, quality movement first, then you can have some quantity in the movement, and then you can have speed with the movement. But it has to be quality first, and the acute variables are what's going to help you with that.
Yes. And those of you guys that are listening in, first of all, Marty and I want to say thank you for joining Marty Miller, myself, Wendy Batts on the Master Instructor Roundtable. And today we're really focusing a lot on power training, especially for weight loss. As we know, it's towards the beginning of the year. There's a lot of people that are coming into the gym. They may be new to the gym. They may be someone that hasn't been in a while, but yet they know what they're doing. However, we want to talk about how to safely get you to power, and also want to say that we're extremely fortunate because this episode of this Master Instructor Roundtable is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. So get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations, access to free CEUs, and more. All of this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM One. So, Marty,
if you want to do a shameless plug of a potential upcoming podcast.
Oh, yes. So join us next week live because we're going to talk a lot about NASM One. For those of you guys that don't know about it, you need to be here. I have my significant other, if you will. I used to call it, well, I still call him my side piece, or my husband, any way you want to look at it. But he is a product manager for NASM, and he's going to actually join us to talk about NASM One. So if you want to learn more, you definitely need to tune in next week. So
absolutely. So you were saying, Wendy.
Well, I was just going to say, instead of going through all the acute variables, I think it's important to really spend time in the book and understand why certain exercises, like in the very beginning, we're always going to foam roll. You're going to do some static stretches if needed, even though it doesn't say it. But if there's something that you know is getting tighter, it's okay to do a static stretch, go into active, and then do some dynamic stretching to ensure you've got good range of motion through the joint. Because remember, when we're doing flexibility, full available range of motion to prepare the body is going to be extremely important. And then you're going to see too that, the core, the balance, the reactive part, core and balance, I don't think are ever optional in my personal opinion, because it's really helping prepare the body. However, there are certain exercises that are better options for this particular phase than others. And then when you get to the resistance part, it's important to have a very good foundation in 1 and 2, because now you're supersetting. So remember, in phase 2, you're supersetting a strength and a stabilization. When you get to 5, it is now strength. So 1 to 5 repetitions, into power. How hard, how fast? Can you do something that mimics that exact same thing that you did when you just elicited 85 to 100% of your 1 rep max? So as heavy as you can lift. It is extremely difficult. And I know we're going to talk about this next, but Marty, the amount of calories and everything that you're burning in this phase, especially if it's a weight loss client, they are going to maximize their potential of losing a ton of weight while enhancing their overall physique like no other.
Yeah. This is the type of workout where you start talking to your clients and they can maybe answer you in 1 to 2 word answers, right? Where it's like, you're talking like, Wendy, how was that? It was good. And they're focusing on their breath, right? So the good news, if you want to keep your clients from talking, put them in a power phase when it's appropriate.
100%. Not that I've ever done that all the time.
Don't use it to be mean, but when appropriate, you won't have to hear too much of their, life story at that time.
Right. Marty, I know you wanted to talk a lot about this one because you get this all the time as well. So I'll let you take that slide.
Yeah. So is there a fat burning zone? Yes. And guess when it is? When you're sedentary on the couch, you're sleeping, right? You're doing a phenomenal job of burning fat. So years ago, there was a big thing on, and, not picking on anybody, but there was a big craze in the bodybuilding community that I'm going to do a long, slow duration cardio, if you want to call it cardio, to be in the fat burning zone. Okay, well, what's the goal of burning fat? Is ultimately you have to burn calories. So the way I always looked at it, Wendy, is just logically. You ever seen a sprinter? They're jacked. They don't seem to lose muscle mass, and they are shredded. So it's like, And, again, not picking on these type of athletes, they do this for a different reason. But if you look at a marathon runner, now these marathon runners, the world-class marathon runners, are basically sprinting compared to the average human being, but they don't have that muscle mass because it's inefficient for them to carry it, right? So when you look at that slow, steady state cardio, you will burn a higher percentage of your calories from fat, but the total expenditure is low. So you're not going to burn as many calories even from the fat, right? So when you look at the table, 8.2 taken right out of the CPT text, if we did 20 minutes low intensity, so this could be depending, low intensity is different for everybody. So low intensity could be a walk at 2.5 to 3 miles an hour. Low intensity for an elite marathon runner could be them slowing down to 8 miles an hour, where normally they're 13, 14 miles an hour, right, at their pace. So they burn 42 calories expended. 70% of those are from fat, right? And the carbohydrate calories was 18, 30%, total calories 60. 20 minutes of moderate. This isn't even high intensity yet. This is moderate. 60 calories from fat were burned. That's better than 42 in my mind, but it's only 50%. Well, what's more important, the total or the percentage? The total, right? And then there's another 60 calories burned from carbohydrates. So you're burning 120 calories. So you're doubling the total caloric expenditure, and you're still burning 18 more calories from the fat, but the percentage is lower. So I view this like money, right? If I want a bigger return, I make more money, I want a higher percentage off that dollar, right? $100 gets 7%, it's only $7. $100 gets 10%, it's $10. I don't care if you pay me in pennies, nickels, or quarters. $10 is better than $7. So we're not saying that there's not a point in time for lower intensity recovery cardio. If you're, what I always say, and I can't remember who I stole this from, so I apologize, but if you're doing high intensity training every day, you're not doing high intensity training because your body wouldn't be able to maintain that. But what we're talking about is for a period of time moving into that higher intensity, you're still going to burn body fat. It's just, who cares what the percentage came from? It's the total expression and expenditure of calories. Now, on your days off or other days, sure, do a slow recovery walk, but don't worry about where the calories are coming from. You're doing the recovery just to keep your body healthy, right? So let's not get over confused on where the calories come from. Let's look at building a base, right? When somebody's newer to fitness, so it has to be lower intensity as you're cleaning up their movement. As they get going, don't let them just sit in that lower intensity as they get into their strength, endurance, and their power, because they want to burn body fat. So hopefully this imagery, if you're looking at it, just makes it clear and easy that moderate exercise burns less percentage from fat, but you're still burning more calories from fat and total calories.
Right. And your main source of energy should come from carbohydrates when you're working out. And so the same thing, Marty, it's like, what is the ultimate goal here? Yes, people want to lose body fat. Everybody wants to lean out, especially if they want weight loss. So they want to see a difference on the scale. They want to see a difference in their pants. Totally understand that. But you make a really valid point. You've got to think about taking your level of ability and pushing that, because if you can get your muscles to work harder, you're burning a ton more calories. And I'm a huge fan, and I know you are as well, when somebody comes to me for weight loss, regardless of what phase, we do something called the vertical load, which means I'm going to go from one exercise to another exercise to another exercise with zero rest in between, if they can do it successfully. Of course, if they need rest, we would give it to them, but we're trying to minimize that rest period because their body has to keep continuously work. The more that I'm having someone work, the more calories are being expended, the better my ultimate goal and results are going to be. If somebody came to me and they were barely riding a bike because they're like, they want to be in the fat burning zone, they're not going to see any changes. They really won't. Marty, you know this because you've seen it too. I'm like, you know what? You go ahead and ride as slow as you can for 20 minutes. Don't break a sweat. And then tell me, how you feel. And then let's do a 20-minute power workout and let's see the difference. Because you have to sweat, you have to move in order to be successful. Plus, think about all you're supposed to have 150, moderate minutes of exercise each and every week to stay healthy. Mm-hmm. So why would you stay in a low intensity all the time so you can stay in your fat burning zone when you're not going to see any changes?
Right. And guess what? I'm in my fat burning zone right now.
Me too. I do fidget a lot, so I think I fidget when I sleep too. So who knows?
Right. So a little bit more here, and then we'll move into some of the other parts of the power training is, when weight loss is the goal, the average individual with only 1 hour time, right, per day to exercise, that's still a lot. If someone could do that, we'll see better results with moderate to higher intensity. So again, use the model to get them to earn the right to move to those phases. Set that at the very beginning of your time with them, so they know that they need to be consistent. They know they need to do their homework so they can earn that right to get there. It gives them a goal. And then they're going to burn more calories during that higher intensity workout, which will contribute to a greater number of total calories burned. That's what the goal is. And then on the other hand, if there's an individual that can do so, lower intensity activity performed for many hours at a time, like those long hikes out in nature, etc., would in fact net a greater fat burn than 60 minutes of interval training performed by someone who otherwise sits at a desk all day, right? So we want as much activity as possible. So I always put it in my bucket. How active are you and what's your exercise schedule? Don't confuse the two. I did hear this from Rick Ritchie, and I forgot where he stole it from because he did say it, is that you could work out 2 to 3 times a week for 30 minutes and still be a sedentary person. Mm-hmm.
Well, think about how many hours are in a day, and then in a week, and then in a month. And if you do the overall, your math is your thing, Marty. If you're looking at the math, if you're not, you want to have like a good ratio. And if you notice that you've only worked out 3 times for 30 minutes the entire month, that is not a good ratio to have. And Nope. So there's a lot to be said about trying to do a little bit of something every day. It doesn't have to be a HIIT workout. And I know that's what you were saying too. If you're doing high intensity, or in your mind, high intensity every day, and it's repetitive, you're doing the same things, that repetitive movement isn't good for you either. That's why we always say, switch it up. The SAID principle, your body's going to adapt to whatever you're doing. If you're always doing the same thing, then you will finally adapt to it. You're going to burn less calories. You're not going to get your heart rate as high than if one time you're riding the bike or going to a spin class, and then another time you may go for a swim, and then another time you're going for a walk. I mean, there's a lot of variations, and variety is important too, especially when you're working with your clients, because if you gave them one program and they did the same thing every time they walked in the door with you, then why do they need you? If you're teaching them the first few times they come in of exactly how to move, the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, teaching them about tempo, and it's the same thing, there's no variation. They get bored. They're not seeing results. It's a hot mess. So changing it up, looking at the different exercises per phase, looking at the acute variables, you're going to help them achieve a better caloric expenditure throughout the workout. They're going to have more enjoyment. It's a better rapport and relationship. It is a win-win across the board.
And no one likes a hot mess.
Nobody likes a hot mess.
So let's move in here to the goal of phase 5, right? So this is to increase max strength and rate of force production. So again, if you have somebody that, maybe can't do 1 to 5 reps, we don't care. That's what the cookbook says, but you're allowed to tweak it. If it's safer for them to do 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 reps, that's fine. 1 to 5 in the beginning of the superset is to get that max muscle activation. Is because remember, all or none principle. You're not going to fire like 80% of your muscle fibers. You fire enough muscle fibers at 100% to move that weight. So there's some basically left on the shelf in a sense if you're not lifting near maximum. But this is where you get to craft this as you see fit. So let's say, my mom who's coming down for my grandson's first birthday, she's in her mid to late 70s. She's not going to do 1 to 5 reps. So if I had her do power, I may have her do 8 to 10. Good enough, but just in case somebody looks at the book and, it is the 1 to 5. So this phase is very important for improving velocity of movement and overall athleticism. Remember, we're all athletes. It's not just for those people who participate in sports. We should treat ourselves as an athlete when we're training, nutrition, recovery, sleep, etc. So the premise behind this phase of training is the execution of that traditional strength with the heavy load that's appropriate. Supersetted, which means immediate, with a power-focused, higher velocity exercise with that similar movement pattern. So it's post-activation potentiation. You wake up as many muscle fibers as you can by lifting heavy, and then you turn them on by teaching them to move explosively. So this form of training, known as complex training, has been definitely shown to improve power output for things like sprints and vertical jump. You'll see the references listed there. And this phase should only be entered after successful completion, as we've said, with stabilization and strength levels, or if the client is well conditioned, and then they do also exhibit adequate joint and core stability, right? They have to be stable to handle these forces. So you need to be familiar with different power forms of exercise that can provide safe exercise regressions. As I said, Wendy, you and I have done a podcast I remember called Do This, Not That. We put that in there, as well as some other power training concepts in our previous Master Instructor Roundtables that people can dig up.
Well, and I think it's interesting because someone had asked me, and there was an example that I saw actually on an airplane. I don't know how you guys pack, but I travel a lot. And even if I'm traveling for a week, I try my best not to check a bag, not because I don't want to pay the fee. That's not an issue. I just don't want to be the girl that has to sit there and wait 20 minutes for a bag to come through. And so I'll have a backpack that's pretty heavy. I have a suitcase, and I just find it fascinating that you think about taking your suitcase and having to put it in the overhead bin, and it's extremely heavy. So this is why I say power is really important for the everyday person. If you travel and you're taking a huge load for you, you start it on the ground, you have to be able to lift it up powerfully over the head in order to get it into the bin, right? So you're lifting in a weird position, and then the bag starts to roll out and you have to hurry up and press it back in. That's an example of, like, granted, it's just one rep, but I did something as powerful as I could, as heavy as it was. It may not be moving very fast, and it may kind of like look a little jerky, but getting it up there, I can get it up there. If it starts to roll, I can catch it and immediately throw it back up because it's already in that position. So it's mimicking the same movement pattern with just a suitcase. And so these are things that happen. Everybody needs power. Everybody needs to move fast. Everybody needs to lift heavy at some point in their life. And we are huge advocates to activities of daily living. You get what you train for. phase 5 is extremely important. And like you said, Marty, even if it's a senior, you need to put them in phase 5. You need to get everyone moving fast and powerful, get them as powerful as possible. But yeah, if you need to tweak the acute variables, it's not the end of the day. You're not going to have the OPT police right behind you saying, oh, you did 6 reps. That means you're not going to achieve that. Yes, I mean, you won't get to maximum power maybe, but do they really need it? That's for your elite athletes going to the Olympics. We need to get them there. And that's an extreme case. But most of us are just training the everyday person that wants to be able to move fast, live life, and do whatever they want without limitations because of their body aching or hurting or getting hurt.
Yeah, well said. It's, just to live your best life as long as possible. And our good friend Neil Spruce always says, increasing your play span, right? So when we look at the third level of the OPT model, power is designed to increase that rate of force production, that speed of muscle contraction, right? How fast can you fire a muscle? And this form of training uses the adaptations, as we said, that were built in stabilization and strength in those previous phases, and then applies them in a more realistic speed and force that we'll see in everyday life and sport. So when we look at the mathematical formula, when you said I'm a math guy, it's easy to understand. Power equals force times velocity. How much can I lift and how fast can I lift it? And we've done things on the strength power curve to where, there's a perfect balance, because if you're moving too slow, you're not gonna have as much power. If you're moving fast, but there's not some weight. So there is a science behind that as well. But when you increase either force or velocity, you in essence will definitely increase your power. So it's on both sides of the spectrum. Are you increasing force? Are you increasing velocity? Power goes up as long as it's controlled. So the combined effect is a better rate of force production in both daily living and sporting activities.
That's it. Mic drop.
Oh.
But then when you superset, so again, remember phase 2 is a superset and phase 5 is a superset. But by supersetting strength and power based exercise, the power outputs can be enhanced. Of course, Marty just said that if you're increasing one, the other one's going to increase, and you're going to have better output. So the goal of this phase of training is primarily power. That's, if you look on whatever it says on that phase, that is your adaptation, which just means your goal. So the fitness professional is going to want to progress by increasing the number of sets, intensity, and the velocity of the movement. So when you look at the actual acute variables, you want to follow those. And if you're looking at 1 through 5, which is your strength, you're doing anywhere up to 5 reps, ideally, and you're moving it at 100% as fast as you possibly can. So when you see something that says like XXX or as fast as you can, that really means that you're pushing it as hard and as fast as your body will possibly allow that motion or that weight to move. However, because it's so heavy, it's barely moving. And so if you're looking at it, it's hard to put a tempo to that, right? I want them to explosively lift up. If it's really heavy, it's going slow, and I'm, breathing heavy, turning red. I'm doing everything that I possibly can to ensure that I get that weight up safely and correctly. And then the same thing with velocity. I'm putting a rep range to it, but I'm not putting a tempo to it because I want to throw it as fast and catch it as fast as I possibly can if it's some kind of rebounding activity. So just remember that as you increase one, as Marty said, you're going to have a better increase in power if you increase both and follow the acute variables the right way. It is crazy when you go back to phases 1 and 2, how much stronger you are and how easy it is to do some of the exercises, when the first time around it was so much it was really difficult to do.
Yeah, we've got stories on how we've gotten people through some type of plateau by taking them back and making them do the other phases, right? So the model is a complete performance model for sure. So, the key thing here is as you move into phase 5, we've already talked about it, with that higher intensity and that superset, you're going to see a bigger energy expenditure, right? This is where, the t-shirt starts to get soaking wet, people are dripping sweat. But by that time, this is something that they feel proud of, and they're looking forward to, that they can work to that level, right? So we're enhancing strength and power through that higher intensity, not just high intensity, higher intensity, appropriate. And this could include explosive movements, complex lifts, and plyometrics.
And that's
Those
another
are-
reason why reactive is optional in the beginning.
Right.
Again, I'm a huge component of like really preparing the body. So I do core, balance, and reactive before every phase, no matter what. And then I go into it. It has worked great for me. Hopefully, if you guys want to try it, I've done it for 20 years, haven't injured anyone yet. I'm going to knock on wood, but I've also gotten people to a goal where they never thought they could be by just following the model and doing it this way. Because I didn't know any better. I looked at this and I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. There was research behind it. I did it. It worked. I've stayed with it and been successful. So take that for what it's worth. But when you're looking at phase 5, the key factors of contributing to the increased energy expenditure, they're going to include high intensity. So the workouts. So think about weight loss here. High intensity. The workouts are designed to be performed at high intensities, which raises the overall metabolic demand. If you're not sure about what I'm talking about, go, if you safely can, grab a weight, about 85% of your 1 rep max, do 5 reps, and then tell me how you feel. Like, how sweaty are you by just doing 5 repetitions? And then you go into some kind of velocity type motion or some kind of power type movement with like a med ball mimicking that. I'm telling you guys, you can feel it right away. It's awesome. Compound movement. So these exercises often involve large muscle groups and multiple joints, leading to higher caloric burn. So think about your Olympic lifts. Think about any kind of movements that could be something like a squat to press. So a push press, any of these type of movements are what we're talking about with compound movements. Short rest intervals, reduced rest periods between sets can keep the heart rate elevated, further increasing energy expenditure. So that's what I was saying with vertical loading. Now, when you get to phases 4 and 5, I would really strongly recommend taking the rest that's on there. Or even in phase 2, there is a rest between your superset. So if you're going through phase 2 and you're doing a strength into stabilization, it asks you to take a 60-second rest period. That is so therefore, when you do it again, you've built back up some ATP, you're more successful, and then you can do it again. It's going to be obviously higher when you get to phase 5. And the reason being is because you're expending a lot, you're using more energy in order to produce the movements as high of a demand as it is. You need to actually replenish again those ATP stores. So therefore you can actually do these movements as hopefully as great as you possibly can, because you're doing multiple repetition or multiple reps and sets of these or sets of these. Hence the short rest. Now, again, short rest, what does that mean? It's going to be different for everyone. So the EPOC effect, Marty, so the post-exercise oxygen consumption. So I always think about the afterburn in a car. So, especially now where I'm in Georgia, it is cold, cold, cold. So you're seeing all of the smoke coming out of the exhaust. The car finally heats up when you're in it. And then afterwards, it takes a little bit of time for it to cool back down to where it was before you even started it the first time that morning. That's how your body is too, meaning that you run it, you're extremely warm, you've worked out, you go shower, you're still sweating. So you're going to have that afterburn for a heightened period of time after your intense workouts. And that's going to lead to even more caloric expenditure and burning after that session is complete, which is what you want.
Yep.
Unless you're going to a meeting and you have to be in a suit and you're sweating.
That's the worst. Yeah.
That is the worst. I've had that happen. So
exactly. Hey, hopefully there's a cold plunge around, jump in, you're good.
I just tell people that just means I work hard.
That's right. Yeah. And, Wendy, this is, to me, is such an important podcast. I think they're all important, but, I just want people to really realize how important it is to look at power. And I'm going to say this for all the phases, is there's some hidden secrets in all of these where there's a name behind it, but they can be used for other things depending what your goal for that client is, right? So just be creative with it. Use the framework that we talked about today for power to look at some of the other phases. We've done one on stabilization, endurance, and weight loss. Shocker, right? It's just understanding how to be creative within that. So as some of the key takeaways, this is one of the few that we didn't put assessments, but that's a given, right? But it's important to use all 5 phases of the model, earn the right to go through there. And maybe there's 1 or 2 that we talked about, the muscular development or max strength, that could be optional. But you know what, with sarcopenia, how hard it is to maintain muscle mass over the age of 35, Nothing wrong with a good, gun show workout like Wendy likes to do. And then, key thing is look for those secondary uses in the model. Train yourself. You are your first client. So go through these yourself. So that way you can then be even better as a fitness professional. And then nutrition can help change the primary focus of each goal. So we've done even podcasts on that. So those are just some of the key takeaways. But, Wendy, I appreciate you adding so many good, components into this. And I'm hoping everybody got, a few takeaways.
I hope so. But if you guys have questions or you have an idea of something that you want Marty and I to do, whether you have a question and you just want us to elaborate in more detail, please feel free to contact us, because we do these for you. We want to make sure that our NASM family is taken care of the best of our ability. And so we will do our best to try to get one or many of them, depending on how many come through, on the show. And but you can always find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13, or you can email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org.
And my info is right here, dr.martymiller72 for Instagram, and then emails marty.miller@nasm.org. So Wendy, as always, it's a pleasure. You gave a nice little heads up to what people can look forward to next week with our topic on NASM One. Reach out to us, let us know what you want us to cover, and we'll do it. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Master Instructor Roundtable.